We know you're here to see how your favorite deck has been augmented, but stay for a while because every type is now well represented. Standard is a flower finally blooming to shine. We're deep in the burrow finding decks for you to grind.
It only flops if it hops. Comment below as we walk through the Week 2 recap of Bloomburrow Standard. Alrighty gang, this past weekend we analyzed the results of 7 major tournaments, including 4 MTGO challenges, the MTGO Circle Cup number 2, the Last Sun Qualifier, and the Japan Open. Of those 56 top 8 slots, Domain outperformed the rest, claiming 13 top 8s and 2 trophies with a dominant showing for Week 2.
And right behind it is newcomer Boros Control with 4 top 8 slots and 2 trophies of its own, showing the power of Caretaker's talent in combination with Urbrass Forge, reminding the meta that they need main deck, artifact, and enchantment aid.
Oh, do they ever. Now, Orzhov Midrange managed 5 top 8 slots, though a trophy eluded it in the end. Now, Zoraline continues to mark the hottest new 3-drop since Rafine and shows no signs of slowing down.
The Lizard King has arrived, highlighting a Speed Demon Rakdos aggro list with 5 top 8s in the breakout weekend.
And Azorius Control is back, sneaking into Tier 1 with 4 top 8s, but no trophies as the archetype explores different draw engines now that Memory Deluge has rotated.
Tier 2 kicks off with Azorius Cookies, which, while only snagging a pair of top 8 slots, did manage to grab a trophy with a highly tuned iteration.
And Golgari Talent also had its breakout weekend, taking the place of Golgari Midrange with its Splinter Twin-esque combo, leading the charge to 3 top 8 appearances.
Abzan Midrange is our final inclusion, which, despite only making it to the top 8 once, also clinched the trophy, allowing us to highlight the latest evolution of Midrange.
In Brewer's Corner, we've got a hot new Jeskai Control list straight from the Rebellion Discord, a rabbit-based Convoke variant, a mono-white control build that looks to grind out the competition, and an Orzhov Braids build that takes the archetype to its next level.
But first, on to our Tier 1 archetype breakdowns, starting with Domain.
Gen Shinahara may not have snagged a trophy with their list, but taking 3rd place in a 462-player Japanese Open is nothing to scoff at, and look at the ingenuity in this build. It merits a lot of discussion. Now, first and foremost, I know you're going to see this paw patch formation instead of up the beanstalk, and it's because of Boros Control. I think there's just enough enchantments running around, Caretaker's talent is everywhere, and we need to have ways to deal with it in the main board. So the push over here with Urgent Necropsy and Paw Patch formation is really acceding to that and making sure that we have a way to deal with it. Deadly Cover-Ups instead of Sunfalls is another choice that people go, I don't know, but at the same time, a lot of these control decks are very threat light. Like, they play 4 Urbrass Forge, but if you blow one up and then you Deadly Cover-Up just as a cranial extraction effect to get rid of the other 3, they don't have that many ways to interact after a certain point. So I can see where they've shifted some of the cards in this to really combat that presence of mid-range grind. And that's the basis, I think, for a lot of this.
Okay, that does make a ton of sense. I was going to ask a question about that, but you answered my question already. So let me ask this instead. These are actually some substantial changes for Domain, I'd say, since last cycle. Will we ever really see a return to Leyline plus Beanstalk anytime soon?
Yeah, honestly, I've been testing a lot of different builds of Domain over the last few days, mostly because I was tired of playing Boros Control mirror matches left and right on the ladder, and I can tell you that I'm already back to the Beanstalk and Leyline. I just needed to shift over other slots in the main, so I think going into Friday, going into this weekend, you're going to see a return to Leyline and Beanstalk, but the methods that they're going to do it are going to change. It's not going to be your conventional build where you're just blasting 4 Archangels in there and hoping for the best. It's going to change. Domain has to get tuned up because what's coming at it is completely different than we saw last season.
It certainly is. Completely different is the name of the game, and this next deck shows that off really well. Let's talk about Boros Control.
Yushi Uzuki took down the trophy at the 462-player Japan Open this past weekend with the breakout archetype of the week, Boros Control. Now, we look at a deck like this, it's all over the ladder. If you haven't run into it, I don't know where you're at, because it is everywhere on Arena. I played 8 straight matches against this deck. So, why is this working? Well, Caretaker's Talent is probably the biggest reason. This card is such an engine right now. If you do not handle it immediately, it's going to get out of control. The fact that with Urabrask's Forge, it just triggers every turn automatically, creates a token, draw a card, creates a token, draw a card every turn like clock. That's super effective. You can also have a little trick here with Urabrask's Forge where you can hit level 2 after the token gets created, and the token you get from Caretaker's Talent doesn't sacrifice on end of turn. Like, you just get that creature at whatever power and toughness it's at. So it's a quick way to double up as you get further into the game. But the fact that Sunfall activates it, Virtue activates it, Archangel activates it, Carrot Cake activates it, Caretaker's Talent is the engine for this deck.
Yeah, and that new card, Fountain Port, really does help it out, help the deck out to subsist. But I want to ask a sideboard-related question. How would this deck sideboard, sort of for its cousin, Azorius Control, how would it do for that matchup? Does it just get more grindy?
Yeah, so you're going to lose a lot of the early interaction, like the Torch the Towers obviously aren't necessary. I'm not sure whether you're cutting the Helixes, but you're probably losing the temporary lockdowns as well. You're going into cards like Destroy Evil and Lorn that allow you to deal with opposing enchantments, because if you've seen the new build of Azorius Control, they're also on Caretaker's Talent. So you better be ready to blow that up as well. And that is taking the place of Memory Deluge for them. So you're going to get into this talent battle back and forth, which is why you see those Destroy Evils and those Lorns. And you're going to see Sarah Paragons come in as well there, and the Bonehorde Dracosaur, just to give you a little bit more emphasis and to recur Lorn if they kill it. So I think there's a plan. I don't know if it's good enough, because, I mean, we're getting into a control deck without counters against a control deck with counters. Azorius is usually favored traditionally in that scenario because of the counter spells, but maybe there's enough gas in the tank with Boros Control that it's not a problem.
I'm sure we're going to see some final matches in various competitions between these two decks, so look forward to that. But the darling of the tier list, at least for this past week and a half, Orzhov Midrange. Let's talk about it.
Alrighty, so Nishimoto Suzuki made it to the finals of the Last Sun qualifier in Osaka, Japan this past weekend with Orzhov Midrange before falling to Domain. So let's take a look at this build. It's fairly traditional. We're not seeing a ton of ingenuity going into week 2 that we didn't already see in week 1. That removal suite is 2 Legion of Ashes, 4 Go for the Throat, 1 Long Goodbye, 2 Cut Down. That's a pretty balanced split. Really, the question is, do you want that Long Goodbye more than the 3rd Cut Down? And is 4 Go for the Throat correct in a field that's going to have cards or archetypes like Azorius Cookies, which we see in the Tier 2 list? But, you know, diversify as you expect, right? The deck is super loaded at the 3-drop slot. We're seeing 14 3-drops. That is too many 3-drops. Now, we could call Zoraline a 5-drop because that's really where you want it, when you can get that value on impact. So it's like a flex 5-drop, but you already have Season of the Burrow and Aclazotz as a flex 5-drop. What this seems to be missing for curve considerations are 4-drops, which is a little concerning and might be part of the issue with this build.
I also see Liliana of the Veil. Is this still a well-positioned card for the meta?
It was. Domain got really tired of it, honestly, and that's why we're seeing somewhere between 2 to 4 Obstinate Baloth in basically everybody's sideboard if they're running green. I mean, people are just tired of dealing with Lily, and it's such a clean answer for it. It also, the traditional method that Orzhov had, where they're like, okay, we'll play Lilies, we'll play Duresses, and then we'll play Hostile Investigators. Between Investigator and Lily, you are just turning on those Obstinate Baloths and asking for a bad time. So I don't know that Lily's where I want to be, and especially if this meta is going to go to Boros Control, where we're dealing with tokens. That -2 does almost nothing against Boros Control. They just laugh at it, play an Urabrask's Forge, and beat you to death. So I don't love where Lily is right now.
Good answer. That's how I feel as well. All right, so let's talk about another deck new to the cycle. We talked about it last week. Rakdos Lizards.
All right, gang. Shota's back. Shota Yasuka made the top 8 of the 2024 Japanese Open with Rakdos Lizard King, marking the emergence of this archetype early in the season. So let's talk about what's working and what's not working, because we've seen a lot of builds of this over the first week as everybody was trying to find something that worked, and a lot of people gave up pretty quickly, myself included, thinking that it just didn't have the gas. But this has the strongest early drops in the format outside of like Warden and Convoke. Your Flame Cache Gecko right here, that is Burning Tree Shaman with conditional, like it's conditional Burning Tree Shaman, but you have so many ways to turn it on, and you can have those nutty hands where you just go Hired Claw on turn 1, triple Flame Cache turn 2. You know, like you can put an insane amount of power on the board by turn 3. The thing that really clinches it though is this Thought Stalker Warlock being a little Thoughtseize effect for you, and this gives you this scenario post board where you get to go 4 Duress come in, Forge comes in. Now we have Duress, we've got Forge, we've got Bat, we've got Warlock. So we've got a diversification of threats, and we've got 12 discard effects, all of which, as long as you're dealing, you know, damage, are going to be close to Thoughtseize effects. That is really difficult for a lot of decks to contain.
Certainly is. I think one of the other reasons too that I sort of shied away from this deck after week 1 was because temporary lockdown is just everywhere. It's ubiquitous right now. So does this deck fear that card?
It depends on how you're going to build it post board. I think there's ways to mitigate heavily. For instance, against a control deck that's running a lot of lockdowns, I mean, it's Rakdos. You do not have enchantment removal that's reliable, right? But you can lose those Flame Cage Geckos, you can play around it to a degree, and you can bump into those Urbrask Forges and Duresses and either rip it out of their hand or go to the Forge plan where they can have lockdown all day, we don't care. And as long as we have that diversification and we don't overplay our hand and overextend into a lockdown, I think we're in a fine position. I've played through multiple lockdowns in a few different games where I tested this archetype out. It didn't feel terrible. Just don't, you know, get 4 for 1 because you wanted to go too hard onto the, you know, battlefield. But you got to play it a little bit slower on those matchups.
Smart piloting will get you through. All right, let's talk about in terms of smart piloting. Good segue. Azorius Control.
Yoshihiko Tokuyama also made it to the top 8 of the 2024 Japanese Open. The Azorius Control build has struggled to find its way without Wandering Emperor and Memory Deluge, but this is the return of Azorius Control, and it's a whole different build. As we were talking about earlier, 4 Caretaker's Talent in the main. That's the draw engine now. That's where we're at. We're not doing this instant speed, end of turn Emperors, Memory Deluges. We don't have the ability to do that anymore. We are playing tap out control, as you can see from the Talents, from the Archangels, from the Bezas, from the Seasons, from the Sunfalls. That is a ton of tap out control cards all on the upper end of the curve, whereas the lower end is nothing but instants. So it's kind of a weird dichotomy in this list, and I don't love all of it. There are pieces here that, like, for Elspeth Smite feels weird. The lack of Destroy Evil also feels wrong to me right now, given how much we're going to see Caretaker's Talent from opponents, how much we're going to see Leyline Bindings, and just, you know, Preacher of the Schisms. So I don't love the lack of Destroy Evil, but overall, this is a great starting place to begin to tune up where this deck needs to go over the next few weeks.
Okay, talk to us more about that. Why does 0 Destroy Evils feel wrong? Why do we want that for the current meta?
I mean, when you just look at the fact that we're going to be playing against Caretaker Talent in probably 30% of the meta now, and if we go to Golgari, it's Innkeeper's Talent. Like, we have to blow up these enchantments. These are must-answer scenarios, and if you do not have it, you're screwed. And you don't really want to play Get Lost on these cards because these are grindy matchups. Those map tokens matter. They will enable extra draw steps or additional power to come through at you at inopportune moments. So Destroy Evil to me is just such a clean answer that I can't imagine having 0. I mean, maybe you don't want them all in the main, maybe you need them in the side, but 0? No. I'm just saying flat out that's wrong.
Yeah, that seems like a very critical card right now. Stock price has definitely gone up on that one, the value of that card. But that's all we have for Tier 1. Let's drop down into Tier 2, where talking about explosive decks, let's start things off with Azorius Cookies. All right, so 4 top 8s for this archetype. We feature this list by Hamuda, which actually placed in 2 separate MTGO challenges. But let's see what makes the deck explosive. First off, we've got the Zoetic effect, as I like to call it. We've got the 2 Case of the Filch Falcon, has that explosive 3rd phase, and then, of course, 4 copies of Zoetic Glyph. Very, very, very good card, still from the last cycle. You're going to still see so many copies of that. 3 Spring-Loaded Saw Blades. Works really great as removal, but it's also easy to craft into a 5/5 with this deck. And then, of course, the 3 Subterranean Schooners, 4 Steel Seraphs, both those cards really bringing the pain and adding to the damage output of this deck in the early to mid game. 4 Bunnicorns this week. We only saw 2 copies in the initial list that we previewed last week, but full set this week, and I think that's a good choice. Speaking of Destroy Evil, we do have 1 copy of Destroy Evil in this list. I don't know if I'd advise more. I'd maybe advise at least 2, because like Dark said, we're at 30% of the meta. We're going to be seeing a lot of enchantments, plus Golgari. And then, of course, the sideboard, ready for the grind with the Tide Binders and the Werefox Bodyguards.
So, Max, I look at this list, and the card we didn't cover yet is Mockingbird. Let's talk a little bit about it. Why does this list in particular want Mockingbird?
So I can really think of one major reason. Mockingbird, of course, copies something, gives it flying. One of the best things to do with this right now is Bunnicorn, right? You want your Bunnicorns, and we'll talk later about Bunnicorn-like cards having, good abilities. But giving it flying, giving it evasion, that's huge. You're adding to that tally. You're also giving it flying, and I think 4 copies of Mockingbird, I mean, that's 8 Bunnicorns.
I mean, the beauty of that is we have Flying Rabbits and Monty Python Secret Layers, so it seems apt for the current moment. Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, speaking of decks that require talented things like flying, let's talk about Golgari Talent.
Ah, yes, Golgari Talent. Hearing so many rumblings and whisperings of this in the past couple weeks, finally it's breaking out. So, no large threats in this list, I want to point out, except for the 2 Sheldreds. So, we're really dealing with a low curve iteration of this deck. Of course, it's got the full set of Innkeepers, the full set of Raskas. If you haven't looked at this combo or been killed off by this combo, then you don't understand how frustrating it can be to go up against. That's why the Destroy Evils and other decks are so critical right now. In terms of the early interaction, we've got 2 cut downs, 2 duresses in the main board. Some might opt for more copies of cut down, considering how much low curve aggro we're seeing. We've got a heavy 2-drop focus. I mean, we've got Bat, we've got Broncos, we've got Dread Knights, and then of course the full set of Innkeeper's Talents. In the sideboard for the low curve decks, we've got Choking Miasma and Gix's Command. Really is a way of dealing with the aggro that we're still seeing. And then, of course, Nissa, Duress, Terra Sunder, all of these are your anti-artifact, anti-enchantment cards. Nissa in particular, because of Innkeeper's Talent, can really do some damage in this list.
So I look at this list, Max, and Vraska coming off a Caustic Bronco, if it's hitting you for 6. I mean, it's nice when it hits the opponent and you get to saddle that beast, but is it worth the risk?
Yeah, as someone who's played with this card in the past, as a streamer, with the streamer's luck, there's so many times where this card has dealt more damage to me than my opponent. So, yes, that is a huge concern for me personally. I hesitate to use the Bronco in a list like this for that exact reason. Now, if you're looking for something that can help you dig into the library, find the cards that you need for this combo, I would recommend a card like Insatiable Avarice. The deck also, just as an aside, might need to have more early game interaction, but I already emphasized that. So, Insatiable Avarice, you're not putting a creature on the field, but if you have a couple of copies of that, maybe one more piece of early game interaction, I think it might balance out a little bit better.
Fair. And speaking of balance, we are going to cover Abzan Midrange, the most balanced of the mid-range archetypes at this point.
All right, Abzan Midrange. So this list really tries to take advantage of some of the 3, honestly, in my opinion, the 3 strongest colors right now in Standard. We've already got 2 copies of Innkeeper's Talent, trying to take advantage of that really powerful card right now, which we just talked about with Golgari Talent. The 2-drop slot, we've got the full Dread Knights, 3 Deep Cavern Bats, and in addition to that, we've got early game interaction with a 2-4 split of Cut Down, Go for the Throat. Now, what does concern me, we just talked about this with Caustic Bronco, is Darkstar Augur, 2 copies of, in a deck that has Nissa and Virtue of Persistence on the top. So, I don't know. With my streamer luck, that might turn out really bad if I tried that out. We've also got 1 copy of Glissa in here, a couple copies of Glissa. Glissa counts as enchantment removal, so that's a really big plus. Zoraline, Gas. With the 2 and 3 drops in this list right here, it tends to be a little bit more low curve than we've seen in recent weeks. I think Zoraline's going to do a lot of work. A couple of copies of Season of the Burrow. Don't sleep on that card. Can give Zoraline indestructible.
Fair. Now, you covered it already, the fact that we have Darkstar Augur in a deck where you could potentially go, like, let's flip Virtue, let's flip Nissa. Okay, we took 14. You know what I mean? Like, that is...
Yeah.
So it's a little risky. So I'm going to move past that, and let's talk about, can this actually compete with Domain?
Midrange hasn't historically done really well against Domain. I'm thinking back to the last cycle with Golgari and that matchup. My concern is that this deck doesn't have enough like early game damage output to really compete with it, and that's really what you want in that matchup. Once Domain hits Sunfall territory and then finds what it needs to get a Trax on board, this really does become a tough grind for any kind of mid-range deck. Nonetheless, this one, hand hate does tend to help, right? You've got, you can use Hostile Investigator, Duress, Liliana, the Deep Cavern Bats, but with, like we've said earlier, with Balos in the sideboard, really being an ubiquitous card, anything that runs green, this is going to be a tough game plan to actually execute. So I'm not sure about that matchup.
Fair. So we got some work to do if we want to play in this format because, I mean, Abzan Midrange is going to see Domain at least one out of the, 8-round tournament. You're going to see it once. So we got to shore up that matchup. Yeah. That's fair. But with that, we are going to move on to the final segment here, Brewer's Corner. Love this one. Let's kick things off with a little Jeskai Control. Alrighty, gang. So, Jeskai Control, sent to us by Athena the Bun. She's always brewing. Love where this one went. The idea of this is Ral. Really, fundamentally, what you are doing is you are playing a Ral takes the cake kind of deck. Now, as long as you can stick the landing with Ral, this deck, it goes nuts. Like, you start with pretty close to a Brainstorm, except in this instance, it's just better because you want to be discarding those erroneous lands or the erroneous cards that we've moved past at that point in the matchup, like Torch the Tower. Not great after turn 7, you know what I mean? And eventually, with Ral, you're going to get to a place where you get to ult it. And that's going to happen a lot faster than you think, because the amount of times that you're going to go basically +2 to +3 every turn with this card by playing all these extra spells, you're going to get to that point where you just get to draw 3 cards, get the emblem, and start storming. And when that happens, your win cons, I mean, Lightning Helix turns into a win con. You know what I mean? You put Storm on a Lightning Helix, it's going to get the job done quickly. So I like where this deck's positioned. It's got a little work to do on tuning, but it's a good starting spot.
It certainly is, and Jeskai is one of those decks that I think many have wanted to tune, and maybe Athena's cracked the code. I don't know. But talking about 3 colors, let's talk about Naya Convoke. Right off the rip, because, I am Boros Convoke pilot, love that deck historically. I have to say, Valley Might Caller, awesome 1-drop. You combine this with Hop to it, and that can be substantial for your board state. Burrowguard Mentor is essentially a Bunnicorn with Trample, and I love that idea. We've got 2 copies of Case of the Gateway Express, 2 copies of Get Lost. Got to have those Get Lost. It's not Destroy Evil, but you got to at least have a Get Lost to be able to do some things, move some things around. Full set of Valley Quest Caller. This does give you the Anthem effect on all your creatures, really, with this deck. And then Phineas Ace Archer, don't sleep on this card if you're going wide. It does boost your creatures and boost that whole go wide strategy. We're seeing in the 3-drop slot a split of 4-1 between Imbidane's Recruiter and Sanguine Evangelist. We've seen how that has worked out really well for Boros Convoke. We'll see if this deck ever picks up a copy of War Leader's Call later, much like Boros Convoke has. And then this is a Knight Errant deck. You do have 3 copies of Knight Errant of Eos in the top end.
Honestly, Max, I played this deck. It was a ton of fun. Like, this was my favorite deck to mess around with over the last week, and I just want Imbidane's Recruiter to be a rabbit so badly. Every time I played it, I'm like, why are you a human? You disappointment. Why do you have to be a human? If you were a rabbit, we would have had an extra, 8 damage on the board. So it's a little rough in the fact that it doesn't line up the way Boros Convoke lines up with the, creature type, so Cavern's not as effective, but it is powerful. And when it gets going, if they don't have temporary lockdown, you're getting the damage in, and they're going to go down. That said, let's move it along to a mono-white control list. I know Athena's going to be jealous about this one. This is absolutely her bread and butter, typically. So, finally, a deck where we can try and mess around with Laydown Arms, gang. It's been a minute. Everybody's been trying to find a deck with Laydown Arms that was actually half decent, and this one might be it. Now, the beauty of this is that it realized Caretaker's Talent, yet again, here's your draw engine. But do you actually need red or blue? Or can you just say, let's go with Bezas and keep the rest of the engine as it needs to be? I mean, you do still get Fortunes as an engine here. Sanguine Evangelist gives you tokens for talent. Virtue gives you tokens for talent. Wanderer, Murex, Fountainport, Beza, Archangel, Novice. These are all ways to get tokens for talent. You can see how this is just an insane engine in a deck like this. Let's not forget White Sun's Twilight. It's still at 3 mana, a token for talent if you need it to be. So we have a lot of really grindy cards in this, and despite losing Restoration of Aganjo and Wandering Emperor and a lot of these classics that we thought would finish this deck off and make Laydown Arms utterly unplayable, I think this has some game to it. The fact that you're in white gives you the best chance of all the enchantment removal you need to beat out those Boros Control, like pseudo mirror matches too. So I like where this is positioned. I think it needs more tuning again. That's why it's in Brewer's Corner. But somebody should take some time to tune it. I do think it's got the power level to beat most archetypes currently.
I agree, and Athena's definitely going to want to take a look at this one. Athena loves drawing cards and winning the resource war with mono white, so I think this one has that potential.
Fair.
But let's talk about Orzhov Braids. Now this deck, I want to call this a take on Orzhov Pixie. It's got the whole Pixie plus Hopeless Nightmare combo within it. This deck needed a few pieces to go over the top, and it may have them. Bandit's Talent, if y'all haven't read this card, go check it out. This becomes an engine unto itself, and especially in this shell. We're seeing the return of Witch's Vanity. Interesting, because in this aggro-heavy meta, you are going to want to kill off those low-curve creatures. Tithing Blade, application of Tithing Blade, Witch's Vanity over and over again can really wipe out the board for your opponent of important creatures. I feel like it would do pretty well against kind of like a mid-range list. Zoraline is going to help with the recursion on all these cards. I mean, it's a low-curve deck, and Zoraline's there to really bring those things back. We've got Braids this time around, which makes the resource war even more apparent against your opponent over the mid game. Rottenmouth Viper cleaning things up, really dominating that mid to late game resource war, as I was saying. And then 2 copies of Legions to Ashes in the main board. I like where this piece of removal is positioned right now, especially in a token friendly meta.
Yeah, I mean, this is a deck that has needed certain pieces to be printed, and we might finally have them. I'm wondering if it's going to end up wanting like a Sarah Paragon or 2 off the sideboard to really help that grind so that it gets Zoraline and Paragon. That seems like a deadly duo when you can bring back Zoraline through Paragon too. So it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves. But again, another archetype that I don't think it's tier 1, but if you get it positioned in the right meta, it could really take off. And we saw versions of that in week 1 that absolutely dominated a few different matchups. But that's going to bring us to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we've looked at 12 archetypes tonight. What are your thoughts going into week 3 of Bloomburrow Standard?
So it's fair to say Boros Convoke fell off a cliff, as did traditional Golgari Midrange, which tells us that board sweepers continue to hold 4+ in sideboard slots in most sideboards, while Obstinate Baloth has returned to help combat week 1's love affair with Lily of the Veil.
Rakdos Lizards emergence makes sense, considering it has far more disruption than Boros Convoke, though not as much staying power. And that said, I mean, disruption and a decent clock is often what you need to seal the win right now. It's not about grinding it out forever against these mid-range piles. It's just about clocking them and disrupting.
Yeah, and speaking of mid-range piles, Golgari Talent has really taken over where Golgari mid-range was, and that should tell you just how dominant Domain is right now. With Domain's move to Paw Patch formation, a counter hedge by them, and extremely well-positioned with all the white-based mid-range decks using Caretaker's Talent as their draw engine.
Which brings us to that weekly question of where we should be positioned for this weekend. Now, if Domain is hedging for Speed Demon aggro with an additional pushback against enchantments, I think it's a good time to start looking at Azorius Mentor to pop up. The Grave Hate right now is fairly minimal, and this deck does a great job of going under ramp and control while having access to temporary lockdown to make sure aggro decks don't just ranch it. That said, Orzhov Midrange will continue to be the deck that eats anything less grindy for breakfast, so that'll probably be that matchup where, it struggles. Nonetheless, I want to beat Domain this weekend above all else, so Azorius Mentor for me, that's where I'm going to kick things off.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'd like to see how that works out. So, that's it. Another week in the books. Thank y'all for supporting us, and a special shout out to our members who support the Rebellion by watching these videos all the way through. We will be back next week with more analysis.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on this video because every click helps, gang. Until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.